Are we ready? Great. Good morning. My name is Assemblymember Rick Chavez Zbur, and I represent the 51st Assembly District, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Today, we're here with a broad coalition of members of the environmental community, labor, the business community, and our state ports to fight for the funding that we need for seaport infrastructure improvements critical to developing offshore wind energy projects off the coast of California. We will not meet our climate goals if we do not take the steps now to allow offshore wind to move forward. And securing the seed funding to give our ports is a crucial step that must happen now if we're going to meet our climate goals that are right around the corner. Weaning ourselves off of dirty fossil fuel energy and closing down the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant requires replacing power with clean, renewable energy. In addition, our climate goals envision the electrification of automobiles, our transportation system, manufacturing, and our as-built environment. And all of this requires that California produce more than double the electricity that we produce today. Offshore wind is a crucial part of the strategy to achieve our goals. The California Energy Commission has established an offshore wind planning goal of 5 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045, and we are not on track to meet those goals unless we take steps now. We need to make significant investments in our seaports to allow for these massive offshore wind turbines to be assembled, constructed, and transported. These turbines are gigantic. One turbine's arms are so large that they would barely fit in Giant or Dodger Stadium. And that's why our ports need hundreds of acres of laydown space to assemble them. The Strategic Offshore Wind Plan outlined by the California Energy Commission reported that at least $12 billion is needed to upgrade our ports to accelerate offshore wind. In February, Assembly Pro Tem Jim Wood, Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal, and I introduced AB 2208, a bill to place on the ballot a $1 billion bond for seaport infrastructure improvements to facilitate offshore wind projects off of the California coast. This $1 billion is just a down payment, albeit an important one. It's a signal of the state's commitment to offshore wind, one that we hope and that will be required to catalyze both the public and the private investment that will be required to fully fund the costs that we need for these ports. After much discussion internally in the Assembly and with Assemblymember Garcia and our colleagues in the Assembly who are advocating for a climate bond, we are shifting our efforts to advocate for the inclusion of this $1 billion in a broader climate bond under consideration, and we have commitments that this will be part of the consideration of the discussions. We're not there yet, and that's why we're here today, to show the broad support for this bond and why it's so needed. And, you know, our coalition is broad and strong. We've got the offshore wind industry and all of our major seaports across the states, the major labor unions, the environmental community, and the broader business community. That's because offshore wind is not just an avenue to clean energy, it's also an environmental justice proposal. Offshore wind will bring hundreds of thousands of high-wage, high-skilled jobs to California in addition to meeting our climate goals. These investments have the potential to lift up all communities, especially our low-income communities. And let me be clear, if we don't find the funding to improve our port infrastructure, and I've said this probably 3 times now, we will not meet our climate goals. And that's why we're here today, to make offshore wind a priority. We must prioritize climate bonds, and offshore wind when allocating this year's budget. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Assembly Speaker. And so, by the way, I want to thank everyone who's here today. Everyone here has been an advocate for offshore wind because they know how important it is for our communities and for jobs and for meeting our climate goals. And so I want to thank all of my colleagues here. I want to thank everyone who's a part of the broader coalition for being here today. And with that, I'd like to introduce Assembly Speaker Pro Tem Jim Wood, who represents Assembly District 2, which includes the Port of Humboldt. Assemblymember Wood has been one of the Assembly's leading champions for offshore wind and climate action.
Thank you, Assemblymember Zbur, and thank you for being here and the opportunity to speak today. Humboldt, the Port of Humboldt is uniquely situated to be a huge catalyst for the local economy, but also foundational to our offshore wind efforts here in California. It is not turnkey, but it is a large expanse of land that is owned and operated by a district. The federal government has put money on the table, $426 million, I believe, out there as an incentive to actually develop the port. There's a lot to do, obviously, to do this, but the community benefits, the benefits to our energy profile, the effects of climate change, all rely on the foundational piece of this, which is the existing, or actually the reworked port infrastructure. We have a huge opportunity. There are not a lot of ports that are deep water ports in California, and Humboldt is the furthest one north, and it is uniquely situated to be able to receive the components that need to be assembled. It will be a perfect staging area for operations and maintenance, and it is a generational opportunity, maybe once in 2 or 3 generations, to actually revitalize an area that has really seen significant economic downturns over the years. We have a large tribal communities who would benefit greatly from these jobs, and a workforce that could sorely use a step up. So these are first steps. We are not going to give up on this. Humboldt County, the call area there that could bring in the potential for this is real. The federal government invested in the efforts to make these leases available, and this is just the beginning. But the port infrastructure is foundational. So many things need to be happening concurrently, but without a place to stage, without a place to operate and maintain and construct and support, we'll never get off the ground. So I'm really thankful that Assemblymember Zbur has taken the lead on this. It's an honor to support him and the rest of our colleagues who are deeply committed to this effort. With that, I'd like to introduce Assemblymember Cotty Petrie Norris.
Thank you, Assemblymember Wood, and thank you, Assemblymember Zbur, for bringing us together, and to both of you for your leadership on this really critical priority. Good morning, everyone. I'm Assemblywoman Cotty Petrie Norris, proudly representing California's 73rd Assembly District. We all recognize that the climate crisis is here now and urgent. And here in California, we are reminded of that more often than we would like. With raging wildfires, rising seas, severe drought, 100-year storms, it can sometimes feel like we're watching a disaster movie unfold here in real time. And it's because Californians recognize the urgency of the climate crisis that California has long been a leader on confronting the climate crisis. We have incredibly ambitious and incredibly important climate goals. And as you've already heard Assemblymember Zbur say, we have a monumental challenge before us if we are actually going to deliver on those goals. And in order for us to do that, we have got to take an all-of-the-above approach. And offshore wind is a critical component of that, and really a pivotal component of that puzzle. I want to acknowledge that we're talking about making long-term investments. We're talking about making decisions today that are going to have impacts for generations to come. And when we're talking about budgets, it can be hard to make long-term investments, right? None of us are going to be there when the news cycle loops back. None of us are going to be there to cut that ribbon. And so when I think about the choices that we are making this year, the choices that we're making with this budget, with the climate bond, the choices that we're making today, I'm reminded of a Greek proverb, which is a society grows great when men, and I'll add, and women, plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. And that's really what this is about. We need to ensure that our budget includes meaningful investments to combat the climate crisis. We need to ensure that we are making meaningful long-term investments to tackle the climate crisis. We know that the window of opportunity is closing and that the time to act is now to ensure that the decisions we're making today will preserve California and safeguard the future for our children and our grandchildren. So thank you again to everyone who is part of this incredible coalition. Really pleased to welcome my colleague from the Central Coast, Assemblymember Dawn Addis.
Well, first I want to say thank you, Assemblymember Zbur, for bringing us all here, Assemblymember Wood for being a leader in offshore wind, Assemblymember to my left, Assemblymember Gibson, who I know is going to talk about ports, and our UNE Chair, Assemblymember Petrie Norris. Really appreciate and hope I didn't miss any of the other legislators here. And I think Assemblymember Lowenthal will be coming. But I'm Assemblymember Dawn Addis, representing Assembly District 30, which covers 20% of California's coast from Santa Cruz to southern San Luis Obispo County. And my hometown is in Morro Bay, which is actually one of the epicenters of offshore wind energy. We have the Morro Bay lease area off of our coast, where there's 3 lease areas out of the 5 total. So as you can imagine, offshore wind development is front and center for Central Coast communities. And I personally do believe that offshore wind, when done right, with scientific clarity and valuing tribal and local voices, is a vital part of California's climate solutions, and really a needed part of California's climate solutions. And so this is why I requested and was incredibly honored when the speaker said yes to being chair of the Select Committee of Offshore Wind. And I want to say that I'm here, point of personal privilege today, to talk about a couple of other funding needs. While I absolutely support the funding for ports, large ports, as well as operation and maintenance ports and other infrastructure that California needs and we have to move forward on, we've also introduced 2 bills, AB 80 to create an important scientific monitoring fund within the Ocean Protection Council, and that funding has been moved into AB 1373, which we are still working with the governor's office so that we make sure that offshore wind moves forward with a science-based approach. And then AB 2537 to create a community capacity building fund so that tribes and local communities can participate in the important planning and community benefits conversations around offshore wind, with the knowledge that they don't just have a seat at the table, but they can engage in in-depth conversations. And incredibly grateful to members up here today that the AB 2537 passed through both natural resources as well as utilities and energy with bipartisan and close to unanimous support. And so I just want to emphasize what my colleagues have said, that offshore wind is critical to meeting California's climate needs. And in making the kinds of investments that we're talking about today, we won't only move forward with the clean energy needs, the clean energy future that will benefit our human communities, our fragile ecosystems, and our biodiversity, our vital biodiversity, but we will also uplift the needs of local communities, the workforce needs, the economic development needs, the tribal needs, the local voices. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you and introduce my colleague, Assemblymember Mike Gibson.
Buenos dias. Good morning. I want to say thank you very much. Delighted to be here and be part of this press conference and elevating the importance of offshore wind. First, again, I represent the 65th State Assembly District. Those are areas of Watts, Willowbrook, where I was born and raised, Compton, Carson, North Long Beach, Harbor Gateway, North and South, Harbor City, Wilmington, and San Pedro. Just to elevate my district and being in this space, I also represent the ports of Los Angeles as well. I stand here today as the chair of the Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement, speaking in support of and why Assembly Bill 2208 is very vital and important to each and every one of us here in California. Earlier this month, I've had the distinct honor and pleasure of visiting the Port of Humboldt and unveiling a near $500 million with Congressman Huffman and others there who stood with us as we talked about the half a billion dollar investment that the federal government is making in terms of offshore wind and this project. It could be the largest in the West Coast. During my visit, I had an opportunity to visit a lot of businesses, but also hear from local residents. And one of the things that they've said, they want to make sure the jobs come. This is an economic boost to the community. This turns the corner and create a new trajectory, not only for Humboldt, but we believe California. And the investment that the federal government made is no small investment. It's absolutely significant. And Assembly Bill 2208, the offshore wind infrastructure bond, will help secure this project. But also it will be the impetus that other projects that will take place and take shape here in California. California will lead the nation. And watch this. When we do what we're embarking upon doing, other states will follow what California, because we are trend setters. And so during this particular, these tours and elevating this conversation around why this is important and the economic boost that it will have for our entire region, we are going in the right direction. Let me say that again. California and this project is going in the right direction. We will change the landscape. Not only in California, but also the entire region. And we will put people to work and we will meet our renewable goals. And so for me, who represent the Port of Los Angeles, we want to be there to help and support that. It may not be in terms of this particular capacity. It may be storage. It may be building. I think there is room at the table for every port in California to benefit from this new narrative moving forward. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to stand shoulder to shoulder with my colleagues and thank them for their bold leadership. Assemblymember Rick Zbur, also Dr. Wood, and also Mr. Lowenthal, for one, having the tenacity, as well as these great leaders to stand with us and stand behind us. We're in this together for the long haul. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dan Jacobs, the Environmental California Legislative Director.
Thank you very much. My name is Dan Jacobson with Environment California, and it's a real pleasure to be here. As Governor Newsom said just last week, we need to act now to help stave off the worst impacts of climate change. Our hotters are getting hot, our dryers are getting drier, and our wets are getting significantly wetter. That's causing economic problems, it's causing social problems, it's causing environmental problems, and it's causing human problems. And so the message that we have here today is simple. Pass a climate bond and include the funds that are necessary to upgrade our ports. If you look over the past 20 years, one sector of our economy has been leading when it comes to helping to reduce dangerous CO2 emissions, and that's clean energy. And even today, as we're speaking right now, 100% of California is being run on clean energy, wind, solar, and water. That's amazing considering where we were just 20 years ago. But that's not going to happen throughout the rest of the day. As a matter of fact, as we get into the next couple of hours, that will decrease. What we need is an energy source that can keep California running on 100% clean energy 24 hours a day. Offshore wind is a critical piece of that. It blows best when we need it the most, which is just when the sun is going down. In order to meet our 100% goals, stave off the worst impacts of climate change, we need to get this climate bond passed. We need to include the funding for the ports to be able to do it. Thank you very much, and it's my distinct honor and privilege to be able to introduce the Executive Director of the California Association of Port Authorities, Martha Miller.
Hi, good morning. I'm Martha Miller, the Executive Director of the California Association of Port Authorities. We represent the 11 public ports in California, spanning from Humboldt Bay all the way down to San Diego. Our ports are uniquely positioned to be key hubs for the offshore wind industry with the capacity for manufacturing, assembly, and deployment of this clean energy technology. Building out offshore wind capacity at California's existing ports will help meet California's climate and renewable energy goals and provide good-paying jobs for working families. However, this development cannot be done without significant investment from both the public and private sectors. The inclusion of a $1 billion investment in a climate bond to be used for port infrastructure will be a catalyst to ensuring California meets its ambitious offshore wind energy targets of 5 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. The port infrastructure alone needed to launch California's offshore wind industry is estimated to be between $11 and $12 billion. So this is truly a down payment for the future, as we've discussed. The California Association of Port Authorities is grateful to stand beside our labor partners, environmental leaders, industry stakeholders, and all of our fearless legislative champions to support this investment. It's my honor to introduce Eleanor Torres. Sorry, Eleanor. Strategic Advocacy Managing Director for the Port of Long Beach.
Thank you. Good morning. The Port of Long Beach stands at the ready to help the state and nation achieve their ambitious floating offshore wind goals. The Port of Long Beach has proposed to build a 400-acre site for staging and integration, and it will be the largest staging and integration site in the nation. This project is called Pier Wind and will cost, its estimated cost is $5 billion. Together with Humboldt, our sites are the anchors to making offshore wind happen in California. However, it will take many ports, the whole of government, and a multitude of actions to make offshore wind a reality in California. Key factors include time, talent, tenacity, and treasure. When it comes to talent and tenacity, well, look no further than California. They course through our veins. Today, we are focusing on the need for financial investments in port infrastructure for floating offshore wind. This startup funding is critical to unlocking federal and private investments, good paying jobs, tax revenues, clean energy in the state of California. It's critical to unlocking great treasure for California. Ports, state leadership, and our state congressional members fare better at securing federal funds when our own hands are not empty when we go to DC to advocate for funding. We must demonstrate that California is truly vested in this sustainable and resilient energy source. In terms of time, the 2031 and 2045 gigawatt deadlines will be upon us before we know it. The longer we wait to signal that the state is in it, the greater the risk that manufacturing of offshore wind components will happen in other states and in other countries. We have a great opportunity before us to create a tremendous spark. Time is of the essence to approve this $1 billion. And to paraphrase the singer-songwriter Christopher Cross, it's time to ride like the wind, California. So now I'd like to introduce Rob Humlin, a great colleague who's a partner with the Port of Long Beach. He's the Director of Development for the Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation Conservation District, a big title for a big project that's going to change and transform California.
Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor and Assembly members. Humboldt Bay is honored to answer the state's call to develop a floating offshore wind port terminal. The site that we are redeveloping is a 180-acre former lumber and multi-purpose wood product manufacturing site that was the largest employment center in the Humboldt Bay region for 3 consecutive generations, and today is effectively vacant, as are 300 additional acres of formerly productive timber manufacturing port facilities throughout Humboldt Bay. So Humboldt Bay wants to honor its legacy of timber production and timber export, but also look to the future and evolve into offshore wind, and so honored to answer the call for this project. So far, we've received $445 million of grant funding from the state and federal governments, which gets us fully permitted and designed, so shovel ready, and halfway to the funding goal for phase 1, about a quarter of the way for the total construction. So this climate bond will be critical in matching that big federal grant. So with that, thank you. I will introduce Adam Stern with Offshore Wind California.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning. I'm Adam Stern, Executive Director of Offshore Wind California. We're a trade group representing offshore wind developers and technology firms. We're also the hosts of the Pacific Offshore Wind Summit, which is coming up in Sacramento here in 2 weeks. I want to begin by acknowledging the legislative leaders and broad coalitions gathered here today calling for California to take another important step on its course to being a national, indeed a global leader on this important, innovative, clean energy technology, floating offshore wind. Offshore wind will play a vital role in helping us achieve our climate and clean energy goals and complement the existing onshore wind and solar that we already have and being an essential part of our clean energy diverse portfolio. Perhaps that's why a broad majority of Californians support offshore wind, 83% of all adults, according to last summer's PPIC poll. Legislators and policymakers are stepping up with the AB 525 strategic plan to responsibly deploy this important renewable energy resource at scale, which will create new jobs and provide clean, reliable power for all Californians. And CAISO is stepping up with its plan to invest up to $4.6 billion on new transmission lines to connect offshore wind on the North Coast. The Biden administration just released its new schedule for U.S. lease sales that will enable California to reach its full offshore wind goals. If the Golden State wants to go big on offshore wind, we must make the necessary investments to upgrade our ports to assemble and deploy these floating wind turbines. Including $1 billion for ports and a climate bond is a critical next step to making California offshore wind a reality. It'll be a down payment, as others have said, for California to catalyze further state and federal funding, create thousands of new jobs, and invest in the multi-port strategy to bring offshore wind online and deliver its benefits to California workers, residents, and electricity ratepayers. And now I'd like to turn things back to Assemblymember Zbur.
So first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here today and for your leadership with the ports, with the Select Committee, with the Utilities and Energy Commission, and obviously leading our body here in the Assembly. I hope the weight of this press conference is as clear to you as it is to me, and that is, again, that we cannot reach our clean electricity goals and our climate goals without offshore wind, and we need to actually take steps now in order to do that. That first goal at 2030 or 31 that requires that the ports be improved by that time to do that. That is only 6 years away. We cannot wait another year to start making these investments. And as my colleague, Assemblymember Petrie Norris, said so eloquently the other day in one of our meetings, this is not only a down payment, but it's an important down payment, because what it does is it allows us, it's what is required to allow us to leverage the federal funding and the private funding that we're going to need to fund that whole $12 billion. We've got to find the $12 billion, but we're not going to find it if the state does not have a stake in this and has not exhibited leadership. So with that, I just want to, again, thank everyone that's in this coalition. It's a broad one. There are a few other issues that we see coming before the state where the coalition is so broad and uniform. We've got the offshore wind developers. We've got all the major seaports in the state. We've got the major labor unions. We've got the environmental community and the broader business community. And, we as a state have a way of establishing important goals to achieve, to address climate change. Now we have to demonstrate that we actually have the wherewithal and the will to meet it. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here and would like to open it up to any questions that people might have.
California is concerned about climate objections and subsidizing power bills. Can we assure them that this is a solution to that? How this is going to help reduce rates instead of increase them?
Well, obviously, the bond measure will actually is $1 billion that actually it removes at least $1 billion that would actually go to that could potentially be funded in other ways. So obviously the $1 billion in the climate bond absolutely doesn't have an impact on ratepayers. In fact, it's one of those things that actually makes it more likely that we can actually achieve our climate goals and keep rates fair and low. But the other thing is that we have to make these investments, and obviously offshore wind is one of those things that is actually a cost-effective investment for consumers, because the alternatives are much more expensive. So either we achieve our climate goals and we look for the ways that are the most cost-effective. When we set our goals for solar energy, 1 and 2 decades ago, the cost looked relatively high, and they came down as we basically, as the as the industry developed. And so, but the one thing I will say about that is, without the infrastructure in place, we can't move forward at all, and that's why the bond measure is so important.
And I just had one quick
Sure.
follow-up. Is the legislature studying potential environmental impacts to offshore birds or any other wildlife in these projects?
So there is, I mean, the federal government actually is the lead on the through the federal entities doing sort of full environmental analyses of all of the 5 offshore wind projects that are currently in process. The state will also have full environmental review of the state actions that are going to be required in order to related to the transmission, related to the impacts of the ports. I mean, the ports will have to do full environmental review. There's no corner cutting in protecting our scenic, our important coastal resources, and really both protecting the public from a public health perspective and protecting our natural environment.
And then that was the point of AB 80, was to get seed funding for the OPC for scientific monitoring. So that $6 million then went into 1373 that we're still working on this year. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to add anything? Yes.
Thank you. I'd just like to add that I think one of the key things that will help utility customers is certainty and efficiency. We don't want to cut any corners, but we need to be more efficient. So we need the ports to be developing. We need to be sure that that we can procure the energy in a reasonable way, and we need to focus on transmission, which is notoriously slow in this state. 7 to 12 years to build out transmission is ridiculous. And I was fortunate enough to go to COP, and I heard people at COP say there is no transition without transmission. And so, from my perspective, an urgency within state government, an urgency will help to mitigate some of the fears that we have if we're going to get to our clean energy goals, and do it in a way that doesn't put the burden on the back of ratepayers.
Mr. Member of the Assembly, just a few logistical questions. I want to make sure I'm not confusing anything. Because last time I saw you and Mr. Speaker Pro Tempore and Assembly Member of Long Beach speaking about this matter, it was at the West Steps a few months ago. Just you cut me off if you hear anything inaccurate. Just want to make sure we're 100% accurate here. Last time it was its own bond, right? And so now you're saying you're asking for $1 billion to be put into another bond, this climate bond, done by the Assembly member out of the Coachella Valley. Is that all accurate so far?
Right. The original bill we put on pause because we've received commitments from Assemblymember Garcia and others that are involved that this will be considered as part of a larger bond. Really, our goal is not necessarily to have a separate bond for offshore wind. The better approach is to have it as part of the broader climate bond, because that's what this is about. And so because of the commitments to include this and consider this as part of the broader climate bond discussions, we're putting that bill on hold for the time being so that those discussions can take place.
Got it. And this climate bond, though, it needs about at least two-thirds approval from as far as you know, from the legislature.
So the current climate, but we're at a stage now where we're basically working within the Assembly, and the Senate is having their own set of discussions about what the bonding, how we're going to use the bonding capacity of the state of California this year, given the many needs that the state has. And I think in all of the bodies there is a large group of legislators who understand how important it is that we have a climate bond as part of that package, and that offshore wind be part of it. And I don't actually know. So it does require two-thirds. Yes.
Thank you. Final question, because I think last time, again, at the West Steps when you had that press conference, I believe, did you say, I don't want to misquote anything. Let me just ask it this way. How far along is the state in terms of some of its offshore wind goals today? I mean, is it zero? I mean, this is an urgent matter. In other words, don't worry about the exact number. But for you, this is urgent. You mentioned we need to achieve this in 6 years, right?
Yes. So the federal government is going through the entitlement and the approval process for the 5 offshore wind projects, 3 off of near Assemblymember Addis's district, and the 2 off of Assemblymember Wood's district, and out in federal waters. So that process is moving forward. Once that is entitled, obviously, the state agencies will also have to go through entitlement processes for the elements related to offshore wind, the connection to the transmission, and a number of other things that happen. The one component that is really behind is the fact that we need to make sure that we actually take the steps to engage in the entitlement for the ports and obtain the funding for the ports. So if you think about it, we've got, 6 years to 2030 or 31. We've already, the CEC and others have basically said that we're probably going to miss it at least by 1 year already. And so we've got 6-ish years. In that period of time, we have to put together the funding. The ports have to move forward with the entitlement. I know Humboldt is actually pretty far along. Long Beach and some of the others are at the beginning stages. But generally, entitlement projects for projects that are this large take a number of years. So we have to have the entitlement happen, and then, of course, the construction. So it is urgent that we do this now. We don't have the time to do it. We're already, it is going to take accelerated processes in order to achieve those goals, and we don't want to cut corners with the environment. So we have to move forward now to make sure that we can actually do that and make sure that we're protecting the public and protecting our coastal environments and public health. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
Good job.
Good to see you.